Hello there, and welcome to Mr. Crime and Sleep. I am so glad you've chosen to spend these quiet hours with me. Tonight, we are going to step away from the noise of the world and into the stillness of the night. Before we begin, I invite you to settle in, adjust your pillow, pull the blankets a little closer. If there's a light on nearby, perhaps dim it now, letting the shadows soften the edges of the room. Tonight's journey is a long one, designed to keep you company until sleep finally finds you. As you settle, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me where you are listening from tonight. Are you watching the rain in a busy city, or is it a quiet, starry night in the countryside? Knowing you are out there, listening from all corners of the globe, makes this space feel like a true community. And if these stories help you find rest, please consider subscribing. It helps our quiet corner of the internet grow. Story 1: The Echo in the Valley, the life and loss of Laci Peterson. To understand this story, you must first understand the place where it began. Imagine, if you will, the Central Valley of California. It is a vast, flat expanse of earth, nestled between the golden coastal ranges and the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada. This is the heart of California's agriculture, a place where the soil is rich and the horizons are wide. In the city of Modesto, the rhythm of life is dictated by the seasons. In the summer, the heat is a shimmering, heavy blanket that smells of dust and baking fruit. But as December arrives, the heat retreats, replaced by something far more mysterious: the tulle fog. The tulle fog is unlike any other mist. It doesn't just drift, it settles. It is a thick, opaque white blanket that rises from the damp earth after the first rains of winter. It wraps itself around the trunks of the almond trees, making the vast orchards look like silent, spectral armies. It clings to the eaves of the houses and turns the glow of the Christmas lights on Covina Avenue into soft, blurry halos of red, green, and gold. On Christmas Eve of 2002, the fog was beginning to roll in. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp pavement and wood smoke from 100 fireplaces. Modesto was a city in transition, caught between the nostalgia of its agricultural roots and the bustle of a growing suburban hub. It was a place where people still waved to their neighbors, where the parks were filled with the sound of children laughing, and where, on a quiet street like Covina Avenue, you felt as though nothing could ever truly go wrong. At number 523 Covina Avenue, the house was a picture of suburban peace. It was a modest, charming home with a brick facade and a neatly manicured lawn. Inside, the atmosphere was one of profound anticipation. For Laci Peterson, this wasn't just another Christmas. It was the last Christmas before everything would change. It was the last Christmas before she would become a mother. Laci was 27 years old. To know Laci was to know her smile. It was a smile that didn't just move her lips. It transformed her entire face. It created deep, beautiful dimples in her cheeks. It made her dark eyes sparkle with a kind of infectious, golden energy. She was a woman who lived in the details. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who left handwritten notes for her friends, and who found genuine joy in the simple act of preparing a meal. Imagine Laci in her kitchen that December. She was 8 months pregnant, her movements slow and deliberate, but her spirit as vibrant as ever. She had already decorated the house with a meticulous eye. The tree in the living room was adorned with ornaments that told the story of her life, some from her childhood, some shared with her husband, Scott. She had spent hours choosing the right wrapping paper, ensuring that every gift under the tree looked like a small work of art. She was expecting a boy. They had already chosen his name, Connor. In the back of the house, the nursery was ready. It was a room filled with quiet hope. The walls were a soft, soothing color. A handmade quilt was draped over the side of the crib. Tiny clothes, no bigger than a hand, were folded neatly in the drawers. Leslie would often spend time in that room, just sitting in the rocking chair, feeling the rhythmic movements of the life growing inside her. She would talk to him, telling him about the world he was about to enter, a world she believed was safe, kind, and full of light. The morning of December 24th dawned gray and cool. The tulle fog was thick, obscuring the houses across the street. Inside the Peterson home, the day began with the usual domestic sounds: the clink of a coffee mug, the soft thud of the newspaper hitting the porch. Scott Peterson, Lacey's husband, was a man of quiet routine. He was handsome, with a clean-cut, athletic build, and a polite, reserved manner. He worked as a salesman for a fertilizer company, a job that often took him on long drives through the valley. To the neighbors, Scott was the perfect counterpart to Lacey's bubbly personality. He was the calm to her storm. On this particular morning, Scott told Lacey he was going to go fishing. It was a decision that would later be scrutinized under a microscope by the entire world. He said he wanted to test out his new boat at the Berkeley Marina, a 90-mile drive from their home. Imagine the scene as he prepared to leave. The garage door creaking open, the sound of the truck engine idling in the driveway. Lacey was still at home, perhaps planning her day. She had much to do. She needed to prepare a ginger cake for the Christmas Eve dinner they were hosting. She needed to take their golden retriever, Mackenzie, for his daily walk. Neighbors would later recall seeing Lacey on the porch or near the house. One neighbor saw her as she was taking the mail inside. She was wearing a white long-sleeve shirt and black maternity pants. She looked happy. She looked normal. At around 9:30 a.m., Scott drove away, the boat trailer rattling behind his truck as he disappeared into the thick morning fog. Lacey was alone in the house. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft breathing of Mackenzie as he napped on the rug. What happened in the hours that followed remains one of the most debated mysteries in American history. But, for now, let us stay in the moment. Let us imagine the silence of that house. The ginger cake remained unbaked. The ingredients sat on the counter, untouched. The house, usually so full of Lacey's humming and the sound of her footsteps, began to feel heavy with a different kind of quiet. At 10:18 a.m., a neighbor was walking down Covenant Avenue when they noticed something unusual. Mackenzie, the Petersons' golden retriever, was wandering the street. His leash was still attached to his collar, dragging behind him on the pavement with a rhythmic click-clack sound. Mackenzie was a well-behaved dog. He wasn't the type to wander. The neighbor, thinking he had simply escaped the yard, took the leash and led the dog back to the Peterson house. He opened the gate, let the dog in, and went on with his day. He didn't know that the dog's presence on the street was the first crack in the foundation of a life. He didn't know that inside the house, the silence was now absolute. As the afternoon wore on, the fog in Modesto began to lift, revealing a pale, wintry sun. At the Berkeley Marina, nearly 2 hours away, the waters of the San Francisco Bay were choppy and gray. Scott Peterson would later tell police that he spent a few hours on the water fishing for sturgeon before the cold and the wind forced him back to shore. He returned to Modesto in the late afternoon. When he walked into the house, he said he found it empty. He found Lacey's car in the driveway. He found her purse on the table, her keys inside it. But Lacey was not there. There is a specific kind of panic that begins as a small, cold seed in the pit of your stomach. It starts with a simple thought. That's strange. Then it grows into, where could she be? And finally it becomes a screaming, deafening realization. Something is wrong. Scott called Lacey's mother, Sharon Rocha. "Is Lacey with you?" Sharon would later describe that phone call as the moment her world stopped turning. Lacey wasn't with her. She wasn't with her friends. She wasn't at the store. By 6 p.m., as the sun was setting and the Christmas lights were beginning to flicker on along Covina Avenue, the first police car arrived. Imagine the scene. The quiet, festive street suddenly transformed. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the windows of the neighboring houses. The sound of police radios crackling with static. Officers in dark uniforms walking across the lawn, their flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The search began almost immediately. It started with the house. Every room was checked. The nursery with its silent crib. The kitchen with the ingredients for the cake still waiting. The backyard where Mackenzie sat, watching the strangers move through his home. Then, the search expanded to East La Loma Park, the place where Lacey often walked the dog. The park was a sprawling area of trees, trails, and a creek that ran through the center. In the dark of Christmas Eve, it was a place of shadows. Hundreds of people, friends, family, and strangers who had heard the news on the radio, began to gather. They carried flashlights and lanterns. They called her name. "Lacey! Lacey!" The sound of her name echoed through the trees, drifting over the water of the creek, bouncing off the walls of the valley. But there was no answer. Only the sound of the wind in the branches and the distant hum of traffic. Christmas Day in Modesto was unlike any other. There were no celebrations for the Rocha and Peterson families. Instead, a volunteer center was set up at a local hotel. Thousands of missing person posters were printed. The image of Lacey, smiling, radiant, and pregnant, began to appear on every telephone pole, every storefront window, and every television screen across the country. The search was massive. Divers went into the cold, murky waters of the creek. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the valley floor. But as the days turned into a week, the hope of finding Lacey alive began to dim, replaced by a cold, hard dread. As the investigation deepened, the focus inevitably turned toward the person closest to Lacey, Scott. In the beginning, the community rallied around him. He was the grieving husband, the man who had lost his wife and his unborn son on the eve of Christmas. He appeared at press conferences, his face pale and drawn. He thanked the volunteers. He pleaded for Lacey's return. But behind the scenes, the police were noticing things that didn't fit. They noticed his demeanor. He was calm. He was almost too composed for a man whose pregnant wife had vanished into thin air. He didn't ask many questions about the progress of the search. He seemed more concerned with the media's perception of him than with the search itself. And then there was the boat. Scott had bought the boat just weeks before Lacey disappeared. He hadn't told anyone about it, not even his own father. He had paid for it in cash. On the day Lacey went missing, he told police he was fishing for sturgeon, but he had no sturgeon lures, and the weather was entirely unsuitable for the type of fishing he claimed to be doing. The police began to look into his background, and what they found was a life built on a foundation of sand. On January 17th, 2003, the case took a turn that shocked the nation. A woman named Amber Frey contacted the Modesto Police Department. Amber was a massage therapist living in Fresno. She was a single mother, and she had been in a romantic relationship with Scott Peterson. She told the police that she had met Scott in November. He had told her he was single. He had told her he was looking for a partner. He had treated her to romantic dinners. He had spent time with her daughter, but the most chilling detail was this. On December 9th, 2 weeks before Lacey disappeared, Scott told Amber that he had lost his wife. He told her this was going to be his first Christmas without her. As the world heard this news, the image of the golden husband shattered. The police asked Amber to cooperate with them. For weeks, she recorded her phone calls with Scott. These tapes are some of the most haunting artifacts in true crime history. You can hear Scott's voice, smooth, low, and romantic, as he speaks to Amber. He tells her he is in Paris, standing near the Eiffel Tower, watching the fireworks. In reality, he was in Modesto. He was standing at a candlelight vigil for his missing wife. He was surrounded by people who were praying for Lacey's safety, while he was on the phone, whispering sweet nothings to another woman. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just a betrayal of Lacey. It was a betrayal of the entire community that had spent their holidays searching for her. The winter of 2003 was long and wet. The rains lashed the San Francisco Bay, churning the gray waters where Scott had gone fishing on that fateful Christmas Eve. For months, the case remained in a state of agonizing limbo. There was no sign of Lacey. There was no sign of Connor. The Peterson house on Covenant Avenue was sold. The nursery was dismantled. The yellow ribbons that had been tied to every tree in the neighborhood began to fade and fray in the wind. But the truth has a way of rising to the surface. In April of 2003, a series of powerful storms hit the California coast. The waves in the San Francisco Bay were massive, scouring the bottom of the seabed. On April 13th, a couple walking their dog along the shoreline at Richmond, just a few miles from the Berkeley Marina, found the body of a small infant. The next day, the remains of a woman were found a mile away. DNA tests confirmed what everyone already feared. It was Lacey and Connor. They had come home, but not in the way anyone had prayed for. They had been returned by the sea, a final, undeniable piece of evidence in a case that had captivated the world. Scott Peterson was arrested a few days later in San Diego. He had dyed his hair and his goatee a strange, sandy blonde. He was carrying nearly $15,000 in cash. He had his brother's driver's license. He had camping gear and multiple cell phones. He looked like a man who was prepared to cross the border and disappear forever, but the path he had chosen led not to freedom, but to a courtroom in Redwood City. The trial was a spectacle. For months, the details of Lacey's life and Scott's lies were laid bare for the world to see. We heard from the neighbors. We heard from the police. We heard the tapes of Amber Frey's phone calls. We learned about the man cave in the warehouse where Scott kept his boat. We learned about the concrete anchors he had made, anchors that matched the weight of the bodies found in the bay. The defense tried to argue that Lacey had been kidnapped by a cult or by someone else who wanted to frame Scott, but the evidence was like the tool fog. It was everywhere, thick and inescapable. In November of 2004, the jury reached their verdict, guilty. As we sit here in the quiet of the night, it is easy to get lost in the darkness of this story. It is easy to focus on the lies, the betrayal, and the coldness of the crime, but that is not why we are here. We are here to remember Lacey. Lacey Peterson was more than a victim. She was a woman who was loved with a fierce intensity by her mother, her brother, and her friends. She was a woman who brought color into every room she entered. She was a woman who was on the verge of the greatest adventure of her life, motherhood. Think of her garden in Modesto. Even after she was gone, the flowers she had planted continued to bloom. The roses she had carefully pruned grew tall and vibrant in the California sun. They were a reminder of her touch, of her care, and of her love for beautiful things. Think of the legacy she left behind. Because of Lacey, laws were changed. The Lacey and Connors Law was passed, recognizing the unborn as victims of violence. Her story raised awareness about the dangers of domestic deception and the importance of listening to our instincts. But more than that, Lacey remains a symbol of the light that exists even in the face of tragedy. In Modesto, there is a memorial for her. It is a quiet place, away from the noise of the city. People still go there to leave flowers, to light candles, and to say a prayer for the girl with the dimples. As you drift off to sleep tonight, I want you to hold on to that image of Lacey. Not the image from the missing posters, but the image of her in her kitchen, humming a song, preparing for a future she believed in. The valley is quiet now. The tool fog has settled over the orchards once again. The lights on Covina Avenue are dim. Lacey and Connor are at peace, and you can be at peace too. The world is a complex place, full of shadows and secrets, but it is also a place of profound love and enduring memory. We speak their names, so they are never truly gone. Lacey, Connor, you are remembered, you are loved. The night is deep, the air is still. Let the rhythm of your breath match the quiet of the world around you. You are safe. You are tucked away. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Story 2. The Hollow House in the High Plains. The Watts family. Imagine for a moment the high plains of Colorado. This is a place where the landscape feels almost infinite. To the west, the Rocky Mountains rise like a jagged sapphire wall, their peaks often shrouded in a crown of white snow. To the east, the land flattens into a sea of golden prairie grass that ripples in the wind. In the town of Frederick, the air is thin, crisp, and clean. It is a place where the sunlight feels incredibly bright, casting sharp, clear shadows on the pavement. The suburban streets are lined with young trees, their branches swaying gently in the mountain breeze. It is a place that feels new, a place built on the promise of the American dream. In 2018, Frederick was a sanctuary for young families. It was a place of cul-de-sacs and community parks where the smell of freshly cut grass and backyard barbecues filled the summer evenings. It was here, at 2825 Saratoga Trail, that the Watts family lived. Their house was large and grand, a beautiful 3-story home with a wide, welcoming porch and a 3-car garage. Inside, the house was a reflection of Shanann Watts' spirit. It was impeccably organized. The walls were painted in soothing shades of gray and beige. Every pillow was fluffed, every picture frame was straight, and the air often smelled of the essential oils that Shanann sold and loved. Shanann was 34 years old, and she was a woman of incredible drive. She had overcome health struggles and built a successful career from home. She was a woman who lived her life in the light. She shared everything, her joys, her struggles, and her immense love for her children, with a vast community of friends and followers online. To look at her social media was to see a life of pure color. And then there were the girls. Bella was 4. She was the sensitive one, a child with soft, soulful eyes and a quiet, thoughtful nature. She loved to sing, her small voice echoing through the high-ceilinged rooms of their home. Celeste, or Cece, was 3. She was a firecracker, fearless, energetic, and always on the move. She had a laugh that could fill an entire house. Finally, there was Chris. Chris Watts was 33. He was a man of quiet, steady habits. He worked as an operator for an oil and gas company, spending his days out on the remote plains, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the vast silence of the Colorado landscape. To the outside world, he was the rock. He was the patient father who let his daughters paint his fingernails. He was the husband who stood behind Shanann, supporting her dreams with a quiet smile. But shadows can hide even in the brightest sunlight. And in the summer of 2018, a cold, invisible wind began to blow through the house on Saratoga Trail. August in Colorado is a season of heat and stillness. The days are long, and the nights are warm and fragrant. In the early morning hours of Monday, August 13th, the town of Frederick was asleep. The streetlights cast a pale, flickering glow on the empty sidewalks. At 2825 Saratoga Trail, the house was dark. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Shanann was returning from a business trip to Arizona. Her flight had been delayed, a small, mundane frustration. A friend and colleague, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off at her driveway. The neighbor's doorbell camera captured the final image of Shanann Watts. It is a haunting, grainy piece of footage. You see Shanann, wearing a dark shirt and carrying a small suitcase, walking toward her front door. The porch light illuminates her for a brief second. She looks tired, perhaps relieved to finally be home after a long journey. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they were going to name Nico. She opened the door and entered the house at 1:48 a.m. Imagine the house in that moment. The staircase was a dark silhouette in the hallway. The girls were asleep in their rooms upstairs, their breathing soft and rhythmic. The house was a temple of family life, toys neatly tucked into bins, shoes lined up by the door, the kitchen counter clean and polished. But beneath that peace, a terrible tension had been building for weeks. Chris had been distant. The intimacy had vanished. He had been spending his time with someone else, a woman he had met at work. He had begun to imagine a life without the responsibilities of a mortgage, a wife, and children. He had begun to see his family not as a blessing, but as a burden. What happened between 1:48 a.m. and the rising of the sun is a story of a betrayal so profound it defies understanding. While the world outside remained silent, the sanctuary of the home was shattered. When the sun finally began to peek over the horizon, the house appeared normal from the outside, but inside, everything had changed. At 5:27 a.m., the neighbor's camera captured Chris's truck backing up to the garage. He began loading things into the back. He moved with a mechanical, eerie efficiency. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicked. He was a man performing a task. He drove away at 5:48 a.m., heading toward the remote oil fields where he worked. He left behind a house that was now truly hollow. By mid-morning, the heat of the Colorado sun was beginning to bake the plains. Nicole Atkinson, the friend who had dropped Shanann off just hours before, was worried. Shanann hadn't responded to her texts. She had missed a doctor's appointment, something the organized, expectant mother would never do. Nicole went to the house. She rang the doorbell. No one answered. She looked through the window. She could see Shanann's car in the garage. She could see the girls' car seats. She could see Shanann's phone on the kitchen counter. The panic began to rise, thick and suffocating. The police were called. When the first officer arrived, he walked around the perimeters of the house. Everything was locked. There were no signs of a break-in, no struggle, no clues. Chris Watts arrived home shortly after. He appeared on the scene, driving his work truck. He walked up the driveway, his gait brisk and seemingly casual. He greeted the officer and Nicole with a flat, polite tone. He let them into the house. Imagine the walk through that house. It was perfectly clean. The beds were made, except for the master bed, which was stripped of its sheets. The air was still. The officer's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. He checked the girls' rooms. Their beds were empty. Their favorite blankets were gone. Chris stood in the kitchen, his arms crossed, talking about how he and Shanann had had an emotional conversation that morning. He said she had mentioned going to a friend's house with the girls, but, as he spoke, his eyes darted around the room. He seemed more concerned with his phone than with the disappearance of his pregnant wife and two small daughters. The search began in earnest. For the next 2 days, the quiet town of Frederick was transformed into a command center. Volunteers combed the nearby fields. K-9 units sniffed the trails, and Chris Watts stood on his porch giving interviews to the local news. He spoke in a monotone voice, his words strangely detached. He talked about how the house felt like a ghost house. He looked directly into the camera and pleaded for his family to come home. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. This house isn't right without you. But as the world watched him, they felt a collective chill. There was no grief in his voice. There were no tears in his eyes. He looked like a man who was playing a part, but had forgotten the lines. While the public watched the television interviews, the investigators were looking deeper. They were looking at the GPS data from Chris's truck. They were looking at his phone records. They were discovering the affair with his co-worker, Nickel Kessinger. They found a man who had been searching for secluded spots on Google Maps. They found a man who had been telling his mistress that his marriage was over while telling his wife he loved her. On Wednesday, August 15th, the charade ended. Chris was brought in for a polygraph test. He failed it miserably. In a small, windowless interrogation room, the quiet husband finally began to talk. At first, he tried to blame Shanann. He told a monstrous lie that he had seen Shanann hurting the children on the baby monitor and that he had killed her in a fit of rage. But the investigators knew better. They knew that the truth was much darker. He eventually led them to a remote oil site known as Cervi 319. It was a desolate place, miles from the nearest house. In the middle of the vast, sun-scorched plains, two massive oil tanks stood like silent monoliths. It was here that the search ended. The recovery was a process of unimaginable sorrow. The investigators, many of whom were parents themselves, had to work in the heat and the dust to recover the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. The contrast was unbearable. The beautiful, vibrant family from the social media videos had been brought to this cold, industrial graveyard. The news broke the heart of the nation. People couldn't understand how a man who had been so seemingly devoted could commit such an act. They couldn't understand how the father who sang to his daughters could be the one to steal their voices forever. In the courtroom, as the details were read aloud, the silence was deafening. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. He chose a life in prison over a trial, perhaps to avoid facing the images of what he had done. But the images remained in the minds of everyone else. As the years have passed, the house on Saratoga Trail has stood as a silent witness to the tragedy. It was eventually sold, a new family moving in, trying to bring life back to a place that had seen so much darkness. But for those who remember, the house will always be the home of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. When we think of this story, we must choose where to put our focus. We can focus on the man in the gray t-shirt on the porch, or we can focus on the light that he tried to extinguish. Think of Shanann. She was a woman who never gave up. She was a woman who fought for her health, for her career, and for her family. She was a woman of fierce, unapologetic love. She was a mother who documented every giggle and every milestone because she knew how precious life was. Think of Bella. She was a child of grace. She was the one who would sit quietly and observe the world, finding beauty in the smallest things. She was a protector to her little sister, always holding her hand, always making sure she was safe. Think of Celeste. She was pure joy. She was a whirlwind of energy, a child who lived every moment to the absolute fullest. Her laughter was a gift to everyone who heard it. Tonight, as the mountain wind blows across the Colorado plains, we remember them. We don't remember them for the way their lives ended. We remember them for the way they lived. We remember the videos of them singing in the car. We remember the photos of them in their Halloween costumes. We remember the way they looked at their mother with pure, unadulterated adoration. In the quiet of the night, their names are a soft prayer. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico, They are no longer in the shadows. They are in the light. The night is growing deeper now. The stars over the Rocky Mountains are bright and cold, watching over the vast, sleeping earth. As you listen to the steady rhythm of your own heart, let the details of this story fade. Let the sadness dissolve into the stillness of your room. You are safe. You are surrounded by the peace of the present moment. The stories we tell are heavy, but they remind us of the value of the breath in our lungs and the people in our lives. They remind us to cherish the quiet moments, the sound of a sleeping child, the warmth of a hand in ours, the safety of a locked door and a warm bed. Take a deep breath. Feel the cool air fill your lungs, and as you exhale, let go of the world. The plains are quiet, the mountains are still. The house on Saratoga Trail is tucked away in the shadows of the night. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for remembering these lives with me. Sleep now. Let your dreams be light and full of peace. Sleep well. Story 3. The Midnight Rain on Castle Drive. The McDonald Case. Close your eyes and let your mind travel back in time. We are leaving the high plains of Colorado and moving toward the lush, humid landscape of North Carolina. It is February of 1970. Imagine the setting. Fort Bragg, one of the largest military installations in the world. It is a place of order and discipline, a sprawling complex of barracks, parade grounds, and housing units, all tucked away among the tall, slender, loblolly pines that define the American South. In February, the air in North Carolina is often heavy with moisture. It's not the biting cold of the north, but a damp, penetrating chill that settles into your bones. On the night of February 16th, a storm was moving in. The sky was a bruised, heavy purple, and as the evening wore on, the first drops of rain began to fall. This was the world of the McDonald family. They lived at 544 Castle Drive, a modest, semi-detached apartment in a quiet section of the base. To a passerby, it looked like every other home on the street, a place of safety, a place where the rules of the military and the comforts of family life intertwined. Inside, the home was filled with the clutter and the warmth of a young family. Jeffrey McDonald was 26 years old, a captain in the Green Berets, and a surgeon. He was a man who seemed to have it all: intelligence, athletic prowess, a prestigious career, and a beautiful family. He was a graduate of Princeton, a man who moved with confidence and grace. His wife, Colette, was 26 as well. She was a woman of gentle beauty, currently pregnant with their third child. She was known for her kindness, her devotion to her daughters, and her quiet strength. She was the anchor of the household. And then there were the children. Kimberly was 5 years old, a bright, curious girl with a world of wonder in her eyes. Kristen was only 2, a toddler who filled the house with the unpredictable energy of childhood. Imagine the house on that final evening. The rain was no longer just a drizzle. It had turned into a steady, rhythmic downpour. The sound of it hitting the roof was a constant, low-frequency hum, a sound that usually brings a sense of coziness and security. Inside, the lights were warm. The girls were tucked into their beds, their breathing blending with the sound of the storm outside. Jeffrey would later say that he spent the evening reading, eventually falling asleep on the sofa in the living room because the children had been restless and he didn't want to wake Colette. But as the clock ticked toward the early hours of February 17th, the rhythm of the rain was about to be shattered. At approximately 3:42 a.m., the dispatcher at the Fort Bragg Military Police Station received a call. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless. It was Jeffrey McDonald. "Help! 544 Castle Drive! Help! There are people dying here!" Within minutes, military police jeeps were racing through the dark, rain-slicked streets of the base. Their headlights cut through the downpour, reflecting off the wet pavement. When they arrived at Castle Drive, they found a scene that looked like something out of a nightmare, a stark contrast to the orderly, quiet world of the military base. The front door was open. The rain was blowing into the hallway. The officers entered, their boots clicking on the linoleum floors. The air inside was heavy, not just with the humidity of the storm, but with something else, a metallic scent, a silence that was too heavy, too deep. In the master bedroom, they found Colette. She was on the floor, the victim of a violence so extreme it seemed impossible. On the headboard of the bed, a single word had been written in blood: pig. In their own rooms, Kimberly and Kristen were found in their beds. They looked as though they were sleeping, but the stillness was absolute. The violence had not spared them. And then there was Jeffrey. He was found lying near Colette, wounded but alive. He was taken to the hospital, and as he recovered, he began to tell a story that would become one of the most controversial legends in the history of American crime. He described a scene of pure chaos. He said he was awakened from his sleep on the sofa by the screams of his wife and daughters. He said he saw 4 intruders standing over him, 3 men and a woman with long blonde hair, wearing a floppy hat and boots, holding a candle. He claimed they attacked him, chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." He said he fought them off, struggling with them in the hallway and the living room, before eventually losing consciousness. It was a story that tapped into the deepest fears of the era, the fear of the Manson family, the fear of the counterculture, the fear of a random, senseless evil that could invade even the most secure sanctuary. But as the investigators began to look closer at the house on Castle Drive, they found that the story Jeffrey was telling didn't match the physical reality of the rooms. Imagine the investigators as they stood in the living room of 544 Castle Drive. The rain was still drumming on the roof, but inside the focus was on the details. Jeffrey had described a life or death struggle in that living room. He said he had fought multiple intruders. He said he had been stabbed with an ice pick, but the room didn't look like the site of a struggle. A coffee table had been overturned, but it was resting on top of a pile of magazines that were still neatly stacked. A flower vase was upright. There were no scuff marks on the floor, no signs of the frantic, desperate movement that Jeffrey described. And then there was the blood. In a crime scene, blood is a storyteller. It tells you where people stood, where they fell, and how they moved. The blood spatter at Castle Drive told a story that was very different from Jeffrey's. It suggested that the violence had begun in the master bedroom, moved to the children's rooms, and then back again. It suggested that the wounds Jeffrey received were not the result of a desperate fight, but were carefully, almost surgically, self-inflicted. The investigators looked at the word pig written on the headboard. They noticed that the person who wrote it had used a surgical glove. They found pieces of a latex glove in the room that matched the ones Jeffrey used in his medical practice. The military initially cleared Jeffrey of the charges, but the case refused to die. Colette's stepfather, Freddie Kassab, who had initially been Jeffrey's most vocal supporter, began to have doubts. He spent thousands of hours reading the transcripts, looking at the photos, and visiting the house. He realized that the man he had trusted, the man he had defended, was not the person he claimed to be. Freddie became a man obsessed. He pushed for a new investigation, a new trial. He became the voice for Colette and the girls, a voice that Jeffrey could not silence. For years, the case moved through the courts. Jeffrey moved to California, where he lived the life of a successful bachelor, a handsome doctor who was always surrounded by beautiful women. He seemed to have left the tragedy of Castle Drive far behind him, but the past has a way of catching up. In 1979, 9 years after that rainy night in North Carolina, Jeffrey MacDonald finally stood trial in a civilian court. The trial was a battle of narratives. On one side was the charismatic doctor, the victim of a hippie cult attack. On the other side was the evidence, the blood, the fibers, and the cold, hard geometry of the crime scene. The prosecution argued that Jeffrey had snapped. They suggested that the pressure of his career, the demands of a young family, and a lack of sleep had led to a moment of explosive, uncontrollable rage. They argued that once the first act of violence had occurred, he had systematically killed the rest of his family to cover his tracks, using his medical knowledge to stage the scene and wound himself just enough to appear as a victim. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was Jeffrey's own pajama top. The prosecution showed that the holes in the shirt, which Jeffrey said were caused by an ice pick during his struggle, matched the wounds on Colette's body perfectly if the shirt was laid over her. It was a chilling demonstration. It suggested that the shirt had not been worn during a fight, but had been used as a tool in the commission of the crime. The jury deliberated for days. Outside the courthouse, the world was a different place than it had been in 1970. The Vietnam War was over. The Manson era had faded, but the horror of what happened at 544 Castle Drive remained as sharp as ever. The verdict was guilty. 3 counts of murder. Jeffrey MacDonald was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, filing appeal after appeal, maintaining his innocence to this very day. He has written books. He has been the subject of documentaries. He has a group of supporters who believe he is the victim of a massive miscarriage of justice. But for most who look at the evidence, the truth is found in the silence of that house on Castle Drive. As we listen to the rain tonight, let us turn our thoughts away from the courtroom and the controversy. Let us think of the 3 lives that were stolen in the dark. Colette MacDonald was a woman of elegance and grace. She was a student, a mother, and a dreamer. She had so much life ahead of her, a 3rd child to raise, a husband to support, a world to explore. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to see her daughters become women. Think of Kimberly. She was 5 years old. At that age, the world is a place of magic. She was likely looking forward to starting school, to making new friends, to discovering the secrets of the world. She was a child who loved her parents with a pure, uncomplicated love that only a child can give. Think of Kristen. She was 2. She was at the age where every day is a new discovery, a new word, a new game, a new way to make her mother laugh. She was a baby who deserved the safety of her bed and the protection of her father. They are buried together in a quiet cemetery in New York. Their headstones are simple, a stark contrast to the complexity of the legal battles that have surrounded their names for decades. In the spring, the grass around their graves turns a vibrant green. People who never knew them still visit, leaving flowers, small toys, and notes of remembrance. They are not forgotten. The house at 544 Castle Drive was eventually torn down. The land where it stood is now a grassy field, indistinguishable from the rest of the base. The rain still falls there, just as it did in 1970. It washes the earth, but it cannot wash away the memory of what happened. Tonight, we honor Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen. We remember them not as victims of a Green Beret doctor, but as 3 souls who were loved. The night is moving toward its end. The rain outside your window is a steady, comforting presence, a reminder that the world goes on, even in the face of great sorrow. Let the weight of these stories settle. Let the tension in your body dissolve into the darkness of your room. You are safe. You are held in the quiet embrace of the night. We tell these stories to remember the preciousness of the lives we have. We tell them to honor the truth, even when the truth is difficult to hear. And we tell them to find a way back to the light. Take a long, slow breath. Feel the coolness of the air. As you exhale, imagine all the worries of the day leaving you, drifting away into the rain. The pines of North Carolina are swaying in the wind. The mountains of Colorado are silent under the stars. The valleys of California are tucked under their blanket of fog. Everything is at rest, and you can rest too. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Thank you for listening with your heart. Sleep now. Let your dreams be a sanctuary of peace and kindness. Sleep well. Story 4, The Mirage in the Mountains, Lori and Mark Hacking. Close your eyes and let the humid air of the North Carolina pines fade away. We are traveling west now, across the heart of the continent, to a place where the air is dry, thin, and carries the faint, clean scent of sagebrush and salt. Welcome to Salt Lake City, Utah. Imagine a city cradled in a high mountain valley. To the east, the Wasatch Range rises abruptly, like a jagged wall of granite and pine, reaching up to touch the clouds. In the summer, these mountains are a deep, majestic purple at twilight, their peaks catching the last golden rays of the sun, long after the valley floor has fallen into shadow. In July of 2004, Salt Lake City was basking in the height of summer. The days were hot and bright, the sky a relentless, piercing blue, but the nights were a gift. As soon as the sun dipped behind the Aquara Mountains to the west, a cool canyon breeze would pour down into the valley, rattling the leaves of the aspen trees and bringing relief to the sleeping city. This was the world of Lori and Mark Hacking. Lori was 27 years old, a woman whose presence felt like a steady, warm light. She worked as an assistant to a stockbroker, a job that required the same precision and dedication she applied to every part of her life. She was known for her kindness, her quiet intelligence, and her unwavering faith. Lori was a woman who believed in the beauty of a plan. She loved lists, she loved goals, and more than anything, she loved the future she was building. She was married to Mark, a man who, to everyone who knew him, seemed like the perfect partner. Mark was 28, handsome in a boyish way, with an easy smile and a gentle demeanor. He worked at a local hospital as a psychiatric technician, but that was just a stepping stone. In the summer of 2004, the Hackings were on the brink of a monumental shift. Mark had told everyone, his wife, his parents, his friends, that he had been accepted into a prestigious medical school in North Carolina. Think of the atmosphere in their apartment during those hot July weeks. There were boxes everywhere, half filled with books and kitchenware. There were maps of North Carolina spread out on the table. Lori had already quit her job. She had spent hours researching neighborhoods in their new city. She had even found a new apartment for them. She was a woman standing on the threshold of a dream. And there was one more thing, a secret that made the future feel even more luminous. Lori had just discovered she was pregnant. Everything was perfect. The life they had worked for was finally beginning. But as the movers were being scheduled and the suitcases were being packed, a dark, invisible rot was eating away at the foundation of their home. The morning of Monday, July 19th, began like any other summer day in the valley. The sun began to crest the Wasatch Peaks, sending long shadows stretching across the city. At 10 a.m., Mark Hacking called 911. His voice was thick with panic, a sound that cut through the quiet morning air. He told the dispatcher that Lori had gone for her usual morning jog through City Creek Canyon at 5 a.m. and had never come home to get ready for work. City Creek Canyon is a beautiful, rugged area that begins just blocks from the Utah State Capitol. It is a place of steep limestone cliffs, rushing water, and dense groves of oak and maple trees. It is a favorite spot for runners and hikers, a piece of wilderness in the heart of the city. But that morning, the canyon felt ominous. Imagine the scene as the news began to spread. Within hours, the entrance to the canyon was crowded with police cars, news vans, and hundreds of volunteers. Lori was a beloved member of her community, and the response was overwhelming. Friends, family, and strangers put on their hiking boots and sun hats. They moved through the brush, their voices echoing off the canyon walls as they called her name. "Lori! Lori!" Mark was there too. He looked devastated. He stood among the volunteers, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion. He told stories of their plans, of the baby they were expecting, of the life they were supposed to start in just a few days. But as the sun beat down on the searchers and the hours turned into days, the police began to notice things that didn't make sense. They spoke to other runners who had been in the canyon at 5 a.m. No one had seen Lori. Not a single person had seen a woman matching her description on the trails that morning. They went to the hospital where Mark worked. They found that he hadn't been seen there in days. And then, the most devastating discovery of all, an investigator called the medical school in North Carolina to verify Mark's enrollment. The voice on the other end of the line was confused. They had no record of a Mark Hacking. He had never applied. He had never been accepted. The medical school the move, the career. It was all a mirage. A massive, elaborate lie that Mark had been maintaining for years. To understand what happened to Lori, you have to understand the mind of Mark Hacking. He was a man who lived in the spaces between reality and fiction. For years, Mark had been telling his family that he was a college graduate. He had even staged a graduation ceremony, inviting his proud parents to watch him walk across a stage he had no right to be on. He had faked his transcripts. He had faked his diploma. Every day, while Lori thought he was at school or studying at the library, Mark was often just sitting in his car or wandering through the local mall. He would spend hours sitting on benches, watching people go by, weaving the next thread of his web. Can you imagine the weight of that deception? To come home every night to a wife who admires you, who believes in you, who is planning a life based on a lie you told her over breakfast. The tension must have been unbearable. Every day was a gamble. Every conversation was a potential trap. But Mark didn't stop. He doubled down. He told Lori they were moving. He let her pack the boxes. He let her quit her job. He led her to the very edge of the cliff, knowing that there was nothing but empty air on the other side. The breaking point came just days before the scheduled move. Lori had found out. While Mark was at work, she had made some phone calls. She had found the inconsistencies. She had found the truth. When Mark came home that night, the mirage was gone. There were no more stories to tell. There were no more excuses. In the dark of their apartment, while the city of Salt Lake slept under the mountain moon, the lie finally collapsed. Mark would later confess that he waited until Lori was asleep. He used a firearm he had hidden in the house. Then, he took her body and placed it in a trash bin in the dark of night, blocks away from their home. He then went to a local store and bought a new mattress, telling the clerk that his old one had been soiled. He returned home, made the bed, and waited for the sun to rise so he could play the part of the worried husband. While the volunteers were searching the beautiful, sun-drenched trails of City Creek Canyon, the police were focusing on a much grimmer location, the city's landfill. It is a place that stands in stark contrast to the majesty of the Wasatch Mountains. It is a vast, gray landscape of waste, miles of debris stretching out under the hot Utah sun. For weeks, teams of investigators and volunteers dressed in protective suits worked through the trash. They worked in the heat, the wind, and the smell of decay. It was a search that required a different kind of strength, a mental and physical endurance that tested everyone involved. They were looking for a needle in a haystack of a city's discarded lives, and on October 1st, 2004, they found her. The news sent a shockwave through the valley. The jogger in the canyon was gone, but the truth was finally recovered. Lori and her unborn child were brought back from the wasteland. Mark Hacking was charged with first-degree murder. During his trial, the full extent of his lies was revealed. The world saw a man who had chosen to destroy his family rather than admit his failures. He was a man who valued the image of success more than the reality of love. He was sentenced to 6 years to life in prison. In his statement to the court, he expressed remorse, but for many, his words felt like just another layer of the stories he had been telling for a decade. But Lori's story did not end at the landfill. Tonight, The Great Salt Lake remains a mirror for the stars. The mountains still stand guard over the valley, their peaks silent and eternal. Lori Hacking is remembered by those who knew her as a woman of incredible integrity. She was the person who did the right thing when no one was looking. She was the person who worked hard, who loved deeply, and who believed in the power of the truth. Think of her as she was on those summer evenings in Utah. Perhaps she was sitting on her porch, watching the sky turn purple, feeling the first cool breeze of the night. She was a woman full of plans, yes, but she was also a woman full of life. She was a daughter who called her parents. She was a friend who listened. She was a woman who was ready to be a mother. In Salt Lake City, there's a scholarship in her name. It helps other women pursue their education, the education that Mark only pretended to have. It is a legacy of real achievement, built on the memory of a woman who was entirely authentic. When you think of the mountains tonight, don't think of the secrets they might hide. Think of the strength they represent. Think of the way they catch the light. Lori is a part of that light now. Our journey tonight is coming to its close. We have traveled across the landscape of the human heart, from the fog of California to the plains of Colorado, from the rain of North Carolina to the mountains of Utah. We have spoken the names of Lassie, Shanann, Colette, and Lori. We have honored their lives and remembered their light. Now, it is time for you to let go. Feel the cool, dry air of the high desert in your mind. Imagine the silence of the canyon at midnight. The world is at rest. The stories have been told, and the truth has been spoken. You are safe in the stillness of your own home. The doors are locked. The blankets are warm. The night is your sanctuary. Take one last deep breath. The deepest breath of the night. In and out. Let my voice fade into a whisper. Let the shadows of the room become soft and blurred. There is nothing left for you to do today. The day is over, and tomorrow is a long way off. The stars are watching over the valley. The mountains are dreaming, and you can dream too. Thank you for spending these hours with me. Thank you for your presence and your peace. Sleep now. Fall deep into the quiet. Sleep well. Story 5. The Ghost of the Pacific Coast. The Case of Christian Longo. Imagine, if you will, the rugged and wild coastline of Oregon. This is a place where the American continent ends in a dramatic display of power. Huge, dark monoliths of basalt rock rise from the churning Pacific Ocean, like ancient giants frozen in time. The water here is never still. It is a restless, foaming gray, crashing against the cliffs with a sound that resembles distant thunder. In the winter, the air in the Pacific Northwest is heavy and thick. A persistent, fine mist, not quite rain, but more than a fog, clings to the towering Douglas firs and the emerald green moss that covers everything. The scent is unmistakable, a mix of salt spray, decaying pine needles, and the cold, clean smell of deep water. In late 2001, this was the landscape surrounding Mary Jane Longo and her 3 children. Mary Jane was 34 years old, a woman whose life was centered entirely around the 3 small souls she had brought into the world. There was Zachary, who was 4, a boy full of energy and questions. There was Sadie, 3, a gentle girl with a bright smile. And then There was baby Madison, just 2 years old, who was the light of her mother's eyes. They lived in a beautiful apartment complex in Newport, Oregon, called The Landing. From their windows, they could see the bridge and the bay. It looked like a postcard of a peaceful life. But inside the walls of that apartment, a silent, invisible storm was brewing. Mary Jane's husband, Christian Longo, was a man who lived in a house of cards. To the outside world, he was handsome, ambitious, and successful. He had a way of speaking that made people trust him instantly. But Christian had a secret. He was a serial liar. He had spent years running from his own failures. He had forged checks, stolen equipment from his employers, and created a trail of debt that stretched across several states. He wanted the life of a high-flying executive. He wanted the expensive clothes, the fast cars, and the respect of his peers. But he didn't want the work that went with it. He found it easier to weave a web of lies, pretending they were wealthy while they were actually penniless. As the Christmas season approached in 2001, the pressure on Christian Longo became unbearable. The lies were catching up to him. The bank accounts were empty. The landlord was asking for rent. The police were starting to ask questions about his past. For most people, this would be a moment to face the truth, to ask for help, to rebuild. But for Christian, the truth was an enemy. He looked at his wife and his 3 beautiful children, and he didn't see people he loved. He saw obstacles. He saw evidence of a life he wanted to discard so he could start over somewhere else as someone else. In the middle of December, the house on the bay fell silent. No one heard a struggle. No one heard a cry. The mist of the Oregon coast simply swallowed the Longo family. Christian told the few people who asked that they were moving again. Another new start, another new city. He packed their belongings into a suitcase, but he didn't take them to a new home. Imagine the coldness of a man who could look at his sleeping children and decide that their lives were less important than his own comfort. He drove them into the dark, rainy night toward the bridges that spanned the coastal inlets. On December 19th, a diver found a small body in the shallow waters of Lint Slough near Waldport. It was 4-year-old Zachary. A few days later, they found Sadie. And finally, the searchers found Mary Jane and baby Madison tucked into suitcases that had been dropped into the deep, cold waters of the bay. The horror of the discovery sent a shockwave through the quiet coastal towns. This wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal of the most sacred bond in nature. The perfect father had vanished, leaving behind a trail of grief that the gray Oregon skies could not wash away. While the people of Oregon were mourning and the police were launching an international manhunt, Christian Longo was 3,000 miles away. He was in Cancun, Mexico. Imagine the contrast from the gray, misty cliffs of the Pacific Northwest to the blinding white sands and turquoise waters of the Caribbean. Christian wasn't hiding in a dark room. He was living a dream. He had taken on a new identity. He told people his name was Michael Finkel and that he was a writer for the New York Times. He stayed in a beautiful hostel. He spent his days swimming in the warm ocean and his nights drinking cocktails at beach bars. He flirted with travelers, telling them stories about his work and his life in New York. He looked like a man without a care in the world. This is the most chilling part of the story. While his family lay in the cold earth of Oregon, Christian was enjoying the sunshine, pretending to be someone else. He didn't look like a man haunted by what he had done. He looked like a man who had finally achieved the life he felt he deserved. But justice has a long memory. A traveler recognized his face from a news report and called the authorities. On January 13th, 2002, the FBI caught up with him. The man who wanted to be a famous writer was led away in handcuffs. His vacation in the sun finally over. The trial of Christian Longo was a descent into the mind of a narcissist. The world watched as the evidence was presented, the forged documents, the stolen cars, and the heartbreaking photos of the nursery he had abandoned. Christian tried to play one last game. He admitted to killing his wife, but claimed that she had been the one to hurt the children. It was a final, desperate lie, a way to shift the blame onto the woman who could no longer defend herself. But the jury didn't believe him. The evidence was too clear. The trail of his deceptions was too long. He was sentenced to death. While in prison, a strange thing happened. Christian began to communicate with the real Michael Finkel, the writer whose identity he had stolen in Mexico. They exchanged hundreds of letters. Christian seemed obsessed with how his story would be told, as if his life were a movie and he was the star. This case reminds us that sometimes the greatest monsters don't hide in the woods. They sit at our dinner tables. They tuck our children into bed. They wear the masks of good husbands and ambitious men. They are people who value the image of life more than life itself. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of the Oregon coast. The mist is still there, drifting through the Douglas firs. The waves are still crashing against the basalt rocks. The world remains beautiful, despite the darkness that sometimes touches it. We remember Mary Jane. We remember Zachary, Sadie, and little Madison. We see them not as victims, but as souls who belong to the light. We imagine them in a place where the sun always shines, where the water is warm and safe, and where they are loved with a love that never fails. In Newport, Oregon, the bridge still stands over the bay. People walk along the shore, breathing in the salt air, and sometimes they stop and look out at the water, remembering the family that was lost. Let the sound of the ocean fill your mind now. Feel the rhythmic pull of the tide, in and out. The world is vast, and you are a small, safe part of it. The stories of the day are over. The names have been spoken. The truth has been told. The night is now at its deepest point. Every light in the valley has gone out. The mountains are silent. The sea is a steady, comforting heartbeat in the distance. You are here in the stillness of your own room. Your breathing is slow and steady. Your body is heavy with the weight of a day well lived. There is nothing left for you to do. There is nowhere else you need to be. Let my voice become a whisper, then a hum, then silence. May your dreams be a vast, calm ocean. May you find the rest that your body and soul deserve. The darkness is not something to fear. It is a blanket, a sanctuary, a place of renewal. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for remembering these lives. Sleep now. Fall deep into the velvet dark. Good night. Sleep well. Story 6. The Whispers of the High Desert. The Case of Lori Vallow. Close your eyes and let your mind travel to the vast, high-altitude plains of southeastern Idaho. Imagine the landscape as it looks in the transition between late summer and the first breath of autumn. The sky here is immense, a deep, piercing sapphire blue that seems to stretch on until the very edge of the earth. Below this sky, the land is a patchwork of dark, volcanic soil and endless fields of potato plants, their green leaves swaying in a constant dry mountain breeze. In the far distance, the Grand Tetons rise abruptly from the valley floor. They are jagged, formidable peaks of gray stone, often wearing a crown of white snow that never fully melts, even in the heat of August. This is a place of raw, unyielding beauty, but it is also a place of profound silence. In the late summer of 2019, a woman named Lori Vallow arrived in the small town of Rexburg. To the neighbors, Lori was a vision of light. She was 46 years old, strikingly beautiful, with long blonde hair that caught the sunlight and a smile that seemed to radiate a golden, angelic warmth. Her voice was a soft, melodic lilt that made everyone feel as though they were the most important person in the room. She was a mother, a woman of intense faith, a beacon of suburban perfection. But inside the walls of her new townhouse, the atmosphere was shifting. The air was becoming heavy with a strange spiritual fever. Lori had met a man named Chad Daybell, a writer who lived in the nearby town of Salem. Chad spoke of visions, of the end of the world, and of a hierarchy of spirits. He whispered to Lori that the world was full of zombies, people whose souls had been replaced by dark entities, and Lori, caught in the grip of a profound psychological transformation, began to look at her own children through this dark, distorted lens. Imagine the interior of the Rexburg townhouse. It was a place of transitions. The smell of fresh paint and new synthetic carpet still lingered in the hallways. Half-unpacked boxes sat in the corners, filled with the remnants of a life left behind in Arizona. In one room was JJ, 7 years old. He was a boy who moved through the world with a boundless kinetic energy. Because he was autistic, he felt everything with a raw intensity. He loved the feel of his favorite soft blankets, the bright colors of his iPad screen, and the comforting rhythmic sound of his mother's voice. He was a soul of pure emotion. In another room was Tylee, 17. She was a girl standing on the very threshold of adulthood. She was sharp, witty, and fiercely protective of her little brother. She carried a heavy burden for someone so young, acting as the anchor for a family that had seen too much chaos. As September progressed, the golden leaves of the aspen trees began to flutter to the ground, and one by one, the voices in that house fell silent. On September 8th, a trip was taken to Yellowstone National Park. Imagine the ancient geothermal landscape, the hissing steam of the geysers, the smell of sulfur and wet pine, the cold mist rising from the Yellowstone River. Photos from that day show Tylee smiling, her arm around JJ. It was a beautiful, ordinary moment in the American wilderness. But when the sun set that day, Tylee disappeared. She didn't return to the townhouse. She didn't call her friends. She simply ceased to exist in the world of the living. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday night, JJ was seen for the last time. He was wearing his favorite red pajamas. The next morning, the house was still. The iPad was dark. The toys were untouched. Lori didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she began to pack her bags for a wedding on a beach in Hawaii. For 9 long months, a winter of agonizing uncertainty settled over Idaho. The potato fields were covered in a thick, white blanket of snow. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the windows of the empty townhouse. Lori was in Hawaii, laughing in the tropical sun, wearing leis of hibiscus and jasmine, while investigators back in Rexburg sifted through the frozen digital trails of her life. In June of 2020, as the snow finally retreated and the first green shoots of the new season pushed through the volcanic soil, the search moved to Chad Daybell's property in Salem. Imagine the scene: a quiet, flat acreage surrounded by tall trees and the vast silence of the Idaho countryside. The investigators worked with slow, agonizing precision. They used small brushes and hand shovels, moving through the earth inch by inch. And there, beneath the soil of a makeshift pet cemetery, they found them. They found Tylee first, and then JJ. He was still in his red pajamas. He was still wrapped in the traces of a mother's betrayal. The discovery was a moment of such profound sorrow that even the most seasoned officers had to turn away. The angelic mother had allowed her children to be discarded like shadows in the night. Tonight, we do not dwell on the darkness of the courtroom or the madness of the prophecies. Instead, we return to the light. Imagine JJ running through a field of tall grass, the wind in his hair, his laughter a bright, clear bell that rings across the valley. Imagine Tylee standing on a mountain ridge, looking out over the world with a sense of freedom and peace, no longer burdened by the weight of her family's secrets. The Grand Tetons are still there, standing guard over the Idaho plains. The stars over Rexburg are cold and bright. The earth is once again covered in a peaceful, white silence. Let your breath slow down. Feel the coolness of the air as it enters your lungs. You are safe. You are tucked away in the warmth of your own home. The children are at rest, and the light has finally found the truth. Story 7. The Silver Car and the Sea. The Hart Family. Imagine a silver SUV cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway. This is a road that defines the very edge of the American continent. To your left, the Pacific Ocean stretches out into a vast, terrifying infinity, a restless expanse of deep, sapphire water that crashes against the jagged cliffs in a rhythmic, booming roar. To your right, the ancient redwoods rise like the walls of a cathedral, their massive trunks shrouded in a thick, wet coastal fog that smells of salt and old growth. Inside the car were 2 women, Jennifer and Sarah Hart, and their 6 adopted children. To the thousands of people who followed them on social media, they were the Rainbow Family. They were a symbol of a new kind of world, one built on art, music, and unconditional love. Jennifer was the storyteller. She posted photos of the children in fields of wildflowers, wearing t-shirts that preached free hugs and choose love. She described a life of homeschooling, organic gardening, and spiritual growth. The world saw the smiles, the colorful clothes, and the viral moments. They saw a young boy named Devante hugging a police officer, tears of hope streaming down his face. But as the car moved south through the foggy reaches of Washington and Oregon in March of 2018, the story was beginning to fray. Behind the digital filters and the carefully crafted captions was a reality of silence and hunger. The children were small for their ages, haggard, thin, and desperate. They had begun to slip out of the house at night, knocking on neighbors' doors, begging for pieces of bread, telling stories of being denied food as punishment. The hearts were not the earth mothers the world thought they were. They were women who had turned their children into a performance, and when the authorities finally knocked on their door to investigate the reports of neglect, they didn't open it. They packed the car and drove into the night. Imagine the atmosphere inside that silver SUV during those final 72 hours. They drove for hundreds of miles, stopping only at lonely rest stops and gas stations. The children were likely huddled in the back seats, tired, confused, and silent. Jennifer was behind the wheel, her mind spiraling into a dark, final destination. On her phone, she wasn't looking for a hotel. She was searching for the physics of death. She was looking at the ocean. She was calculating the height of the cliffs. They reached a scenic overlook in Mendocino County, California. It is a place of haunting beauty, a high, grass-covered bluff that drops over 100 feet into a rocky, churning cove. The air here is always cold, and the sound of the ocean below is a constant, violent percussion. On the morning of March 26th, the car didn't stop at the overlook. There were no skid marks on the grass. Jennifer Hart didn't hesitate. She pressed her foot to the accelerator and drove the silver SUV straight off the edge of the world. The car hit the rocks below with a force that the ocean immediately tried to swallow. When the first passers-by looked over the edge, they saw the silver roof of the car glinting in the morning sun, half submerged in the tide. As the recovery began, the world was forced to confront the truth. The free hugs were gone. The colorful t-shirts were lost to the sea. The 6 children, Marquez, Hannah, Devante, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra, had been led to their end by the very people who had promised to save them. Tonight, we do not think of the betrayal. We think of the children as they should have been. Imagine Devante not crying at a protest, but laughing at a joke. Imagine the girls playing in the redwoods, their voices lost in the rustle of the giant ferns. Imagine them full, warm, and loved by a world that truly saw them. The Pacific Ocean is quiet now. The tide has gone out, and the rocks are still. The redwoods in the north are breathing in the fog, and the stars are reflecting in the dark water of the cove. Your journey tonight is coming to its end. The long roads have all been traveled. The mountains have been crossed, and the oceans have been reached. Feel the stillness of your room. The air is calm. Your bed is a sanctuary of warmth. There is no more movement, no more sound, no more searching. Take a deep, slow breath. Feel your body sinking into the mattress. You are floating on a sea of peace. The names of the children are safe in the night air. The truth has been told, and the shadows have been chased away. Let the rhythm of the waves in your mind carry you into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sleep well.